Homeopathy is a Greek word or Greek derivation, and it is in ancient Greek sources that we find the first written accounts of the homeopathic principle in medicine. This is the principle that what a substance can cause, it can also cure. Like cures like. It is an ancient observation. In the Greek manner, with its love of symmetries, it is diametrically opposed to allopathy and the allopathic principle, namely that opposites cure. Cold will cure hot and moist will cure dry. Greek medicine acknowledges both modes of cure. And in fact, this is the case in modern medicine as well. While it is largely allopathic, there are many instances where the homeopathic principle is involved. The most obvious is in vaccines. The idea that you protect someone from smallpox by giving them a small dose of smallpox is thoroughly homeopathic in the broader sense. But there are many other cases where a medicine given in one dose will have the opposite effect to a different dose, where the mode of cure is, strictly speaking, homeopathic. The homeopathic effect is based upon the commonly observed biphasal nature of toxins. We are actually all very familiar with it. Alcohol. Recreational alcohol is the obvious example. A small quantity of this toxin makes us feel uplifted, happy and jolly. But a larger dose of the same substance, just a few more drinks, makes us feel depressed and sad, morose and lethargic. How can the same substance produce exactly opposite effects? The dose is the poison, as they say. But the Greeks observed this biphasal phenomenon. One substance can produce diametrically opposed effects on the human body. Alcohol is a depressant, but in the right dose, it lifts us up and acts as a euphoric. How interesting that nature should be like this. Homeopathic effects, in fact, underpin a wide range of common medicines and supplements. Consider turmeric, for instance. It's taken as a supplement for a wide range of conditions, primarily joint inflammation and such, and has a well-established record of being helpful in some cases. How does it work? It's actually a toxin. The supplement is a small dose of poison, a phytotoxin. The turmeric is a strong plant derivative, as you can taste, that actually irritates the body, but only slightly. In response, the body compensates and responds, and in fact overcompensates. The body mobilizes a whole train of responses to protect itself from an environment where it is exposed to this phytotoxin, and works to negate and anticipate the effects of the toxin. It is this response that has the therapeutic effect. The turmeric actually irritates the inflamed joints and ligatures. The body's overcompensation is anti-inflammatory. This is herbalism, though. It uses homeopathic effects, but not in the way homeopaths, so-called, do. Homeopaths will scoff at this type of herbalism, as they do vaccines, and regard them as crude and primitive instances of the homeopathic principle. The word homeopathy in general use refers not to the general principle, as observed anciently by the Greeks, but to a particular development of that principle fathered by the German Enlightenment physician Samuel Hahnemann. This is a widely rejected system of therapeutics that proposes the rigorous universal application of the homeopathic principle, rejecting allopathic medicine outright. It has many millions of advocates worldwide still, but it was unsuccessful in its historical battle with allopathy and is now generally deemed to be unscientific. Samuel Hahnemann was, amongst other things, a linguistic genius He made his living translating ancient medical texts. It was when translating ancient Greek writers that he first encountered the idea of like curing like and the biphasal action of toxins. By his own account, this ancient reference matched his observations in treating malaria. The standard medicine, quinine, from the cinchona bark, had the strange property of soothing fever, even though its toxicity causes fever. With that as his beginning, Hahnemann explored the idea, experimented, and claimed to have found a means of harnessing this curative power not only in cases like quinine, but in pharmacological substances generally. What we call homeopathy today is Hahnemannian homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann's development of the ancient homeopathic principle. With that exception, modern homeopaths are followers of Samuel Hahnemann to a greater or lesser degree of orthodoxy. Hahnemann's methods were rejected in his day, but gathered many devotees. Right up to the 20th century, Hahnemannian homeopathy posed as a well-patronised alternative to established, that is, allopathic medicine. In fairness to Hahnemann, allopathic medicines in his time were brutal and often violent. Mercury was prescribed for syphilis. The side effects of conventional medicine were very often horrific. Hahnemann was sincerely motivated to find a gentler, more humane system of therapeutics. Contemporary homeopathy continues to be critical of established medicine on these grounds. Most importantly, in his quest for a safer and gentler medicine, Hahnemann was led to the use of microdoses. This is what homeopathy, modern homeopathy, is most famous or infamous for. It was not part of ancient Greek homeopathy. It was Hahnemann's own development. It is the most characteristic feature of Hahnemannian homeopathy. Often when we say that such and such was a homeopathic amount, we mean tiny or microscopic, or even beyond detection. Technically, this is a misuse of the word. By his own account, the steps Hahnemann followed were these. He discovered that where like can cure like, it very often first aggravates. Quinine, for example. It may aggravate fever before it eases fever. He therefore administered smaller doses, but this of course meant the power of the drug was diminished. There was no way to harness the homeopathic effect without causing aggravation. This led him to try two common laboratory methods, serial dilution and succussion. In serial dilution, you take, say, 1 part of the original drug and dilute it with 9 parts of a neutral medium, say water. Then 1 part of that is diluted with 9 parts of the medium and so on. Serial dilution. At each dilution, though, the drug is succussed, that is, it is hit with force, which is to say shaken or thumped with force. Simple dilution, so Hahnemann found, does nothing. The key was to apply kinetic energy at each dilution. By this means, Hahnemann claimed, the original power of the drug, its homeopathic power, can be preserved while eliminating its side effects. This indeed is the central claim of Hahnemannian homeopathy. Succussed serial dilutions can act as homeopathic agents. Moreover, Hahnemann claimed that his method preserved the power of the drug even in very high dilutions, well beyond the point where any molecules of the original substance could possibly remain. This notion was ridiculed in Hahnemann's day and is still ridiculed today. It seems like the very essence of quackery. A homeopath will sell a vial of nothing but tap water to the gullible, telling them it will cure their disease. Such homeopathic medicines are, properly speaking, Hahnemannian dilutions. This is what people think of as homeopathy, Hahnemannian dilutions. This is different from the ancient homeopathic principle itself. It is a specific claim to have found a way to harness that principle. Note well that no one denies that there are homeopathic effects in nature, but can they be harnessed by Hahnemannian dilutions? Modern homeopathy, as opposed to ancient practice, is built on this claim. We need to distinguish between the principle itself and the particular therapeutic claims made by Samuel Hahnemann and his followers. Hahnemannian dilutions are often the butt of some jokes. Here's one. Did you hear about the man who was taking a homeopathic remedy? He forgot to take it one day and overdosed. It might help at this point to give an example. A common homeopathic medicine sometimes found in commercial pharmacies or even supermarkets today is a preparation of the alpine herb arnica. This is a highly toxic plant. Ingestion or even touching the plant can cause poisoning, with general aching and pain in the muscles and joints. The symptoms bear a resemblance to trauma. You might buy a bottle of arnica in the potency of 10x, say. This means that a solution of the herb has been diluted 10 times and succussed, violently beaten and shaken at each serial dilution. At the dilution 10x, there is very, very little of the original herb remaining. And yet, homeopaths claim that such a dilution of arnica can relieve, by the homeopathic effect, such conditions as muscle soreness, bruising and injury. Arnica is a common first aid remedy in modern homeopathy. What you are buying, though, is, properly speaking, a Hahnemannian dilution. The claim is that such dilutions activate homeopathic effects. Conventional medicine and science deem such products as useless at best, but at least harmless in themselves. Homeopaths, they claim, are selling placebos. Chemical analysis of homeopathic medicines, Hahnemannian dilutions, reveals no active ingredients. If about 30% of people report such medicines help them, that is because about 30% of all medicine is the placebo effect. Despite its gentle therapeutic profile, Hahnemannian homeopathy was and still is combative. Hahnemann was a disagreeable, short-tempered sort of man who took on the medical establishment of his day with all guns blazing. This temperament, I dare say, has not served homeopathy well. Even today, many homeopaths follow in Hahnemann's path and fight the old battles, often further tarnishing perceptions of their cause along the way. Many homeopaths, for example, are vociferous opponents of vaccine regimes, their objection being that vaccines are a crude and dangerous misapplication of the homeopathic principle. That fight, which goes back nearly 200 years, is essentially about Hahnemannian dilutions versus live inoculation, not about the principle itself. This is in the context, it must be said, of homeopathy's contemporary decline. Its geographical heartland today, beyond Hahnemann's Germany, is India, a legacy of British India, and sponsorship by the British and other monarchies of Europe. Queen Elizabeth had an attendant homeopath until her final breath. But even among alternative medicines, homeopathy as a modality is in a phase of decline. It was once the alternative. Now it competes with traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Ayurvedic medicine, chiropractic, and many others. Among these, it is often regarded as having the flimsiest scientific foundations. It is an easy, ongoing target for anti-quackery campaigners. It is nevertheless persistent, and its current marginalisation is by no means terminal, because the homeopathic principle in itself is an observable reality, and is not in question. The controversy concerns Hahnemann's claim to have found a universal application of that specific power of nature. In this, Hahnemann, a man of the Enlightenment, insisted he was rigorously empirical. But in his age, and still in ours, homeopaths are unable to give any satisfactory account of exactly how their medicines might work. Hahnemann himself was left having to admit it was an empirical mystery. His dilutions work, but he did not really know how. All manner of pseudo-scientific theories have been proposed, most of them drawing on vitalism, and all of them discredited. Homeopaths are at a loss to explain how the power of a substance to activate homeopathic effects can be preserved in Hahnemannian dilutions. What is the mechanism? What is the physics? Homeopaths might sometimes be able to point to anecdotal or even statistical studies that favour their case, but they still cannot explain how and why their remedies might work. This is by far the biggest hurdle homeopathy has faced in its quest for scientific legitimacy. Mind you, modern medicine, allopathic medicine, Western medicine, call it what you will, often uses drugs the exact mechanisms of which are as yet unknown. But it is a chronic problem for homeopathy. How can they demonstrate that their medicines are not just magic water posing as placebos? For the most part, modern and contemporary leaders in the homeopathic space recycle versions of vitalism, making an appeal to an ill-defined life force or such. It makes as much impression as the attempts of astrologers to explain how, through what mechanism, it is that distant constellations and planets can mediate effects upon terrestrial life. In this regard, perhaps all is not lost for the Hahnemannians, though. There are some interesting things on the horizon. One of them is the side effect of nanotechnology. This opens up a new frontier. The development of that technology has necessitated the invention of various ultra-sensitive methods of measuring things at a nanoscale. Recently, these methods have been turned to the study of Hahnemannian dilutions. In one study, it was shown that nanomarkers for arsenic could be detected at exceedingly high dilutions. Such studies seem to establish at least one basic conclusion, namely that, whatever they are, Hahnemannian dilutions are not simply water. There is a measurable, demonstrable difference at a nano level between plain water and a Hahnemannian dilution. It is only now that we can detect it. Researchers have speculated that the effect seems to be electrophysical in nature, although this is not certain. And there is nothing to say such dilutions have any curative potential. But if we take a substance and apply serial dilution, adding kinetic energy at each dilution, the method Hahnemann invented in the early 1800s, some imprint is carried through the dilutions, and such dilutions are demonstrably different to plain water. This conclusion, which is both modest but also something of a breakthrough, is established in a small but growing literature of peer-reviewed, published studies according to the usual scientific protocols. This would be a good start for Hahnemannian homeopathy, at least establish that Hahnemannian dilutions are in some way different to plain water. Skeptics ridicule homeopaths for claiming that water has a memory. Recent studies might not prove that, but they do prove that in some way Hahnemannian dilutions are physically different to plain water, and the difference is carried through the whole scale of dilutions, even to the most stratospheric attenuations. Recent studies, though, are poorly funded and exceedingly sparse, and as I say, a very marginal spin-off from advances in the nanosciences. No one is going to invest much money and time to the study of Hahnemannian dilutions as an oddity of physics. but that might be where the future of homeopathy lies insofar as it is built upon Hahnemannian dilutions. The wider claim of homeopathy, namely that similar things have a curative effect upon similar things, is already established as an observable phenomenon. That is not the problem. But how extensive is it, and how can we apply it in medicine? Critics say that Hahnemann exaggerated it wildly. We could also say that he broke the spirit of the Greeks by failing to see that allopathic and homeopathic effects are complementary, as the Greeks would have it, and not antithetical. Be that as it may, it is an inherently worthwhile aspect of nature to study and contemplate, and where possible exploit. There are things that will cause fever in a healthy human being that will, at the same time, reduce fever in a fevered human being. The Greeks were right to consider this to be something of interest. But was Samuel Hahnemann right to see it everywhere he looked and to turn it into a universal principle, or the only principle, as he would have it, of medical therapeutics? Homeopathy is paradoxical and problematic. My primary interest derives from the fact my doctoral studies concerned ancient Greek natural science and cosmology. I'm interested in homeopathy in the ancient Greek sense. Philosophically, it belongs as part of the Neoplatonic tradition of coincidentia oppositorum. Homeopathy, even in its Greek sense, is a mode of thinking arising out of the coincidence of opposites. Even in Hahnemann's supposedly empirical development of it, it is still an unusually perspicuous unpacking of that philosophical approach to nature. The coincidence or coexistence of opposites is a deeply Greek observation. That white is hidden in black, that day is hidden in night, that opposites coexist, that where you find one thing, its opposite is hidden within it, already implied. In fact, if only for philosophical and intellectually aesthetic reasons, Hahnemann's entirely rational system of medicine is a work of beauty, and skeptics show themselves as oafs for not appreciating it at that level. No one can question Hahnemann's sincerity, nor his genius, whether you think it ended in folly or not. It was a beautiful thing he created. As for claims of clinical efficacy, the Hahnemannian modality has had a major problem from the beginning. Its exact application in practice requires a prodigious capability on the part of the physician. It is inherently difficult. It is marketed as simple. In reality, it is demanding. If it works in theory, it only works for a very competent exponent. It requires of the doctor unusually deep training and experience in pathology and toxicology for a start. Then there is the huge materia medica to be mastered. Since the prescription of the suitable remedy is guided, as Hahnemann says, by what symptoms are peculiar and unusual in a given case, the physician must have an altogether thorough acquaintance with what is normal, and it can only be acquired through long clinical experience. Yet, from the beginning, homeopathy has attracted lesser talents. The best and most outstanding medical students don't go into homeopathy for a career. Instead, it operates as a fringe science. There are good people and talented people, but not the best people. And there is no escaping the fact that homeopathy's future can only lie with high caliber minds. Hahnemann himself found it devilishly difficult to pinpoint exactly the right remedy in exactly the right doses upon which success depends. It is like archery. The physician needs to hit the bullseye from a great distance again and again throughout a course of treatment. It is very, very hard to find a good homeopath, considerably easier to find a good chiropractor, for example. So I might want to say about homeopathy what communists like to say about communism, that it hasn't really been tried, and that past failures don't count. I'm not sure about communism, but I do think that homeopathy, in the wider sense, could yet surprise us if somehow the right minds were set to the task, asking the right questions. There is much that is valuable in the Hahnemannian legacy anyway. Perhaps most important is the insistence in homeopathic theory that mind and body are continuous. It is a so-called holistic modality that considers the entire person rather than isolated symptoms, and does so in a particularly elegant way. Hahnemann, let us add here, was for all his vitalism a materialist and a rationalist. He wasn't given to the supernatural at all. It is terribly ironic that his system of medicine has become associated with New Age healing, crystals and the like. Western medicine makes nothing of the fact that a person suffering from stomach complaints also has depression. Homeopathy sees mind and body as a continuum, and starts from the fact that both the stomach complaint and the depression have something crucial in common. They're happening in the same organism at the same time, and therefore cannot be unrelated. This is a very worthy aspect of homeopathic therapeutics. Homeopathy addresses the Cartesian nature of modern medicine head-on. The psychological symptom pictures in the homeopathic materia medica are among its treasures. A relevant contemporary case of the homeopathic effect, by the way, might be the use of psychedelics in microdoses in psychiatric ailments. There's a lot of press about this, but few note the homeopathic effect. Substances that in large doses cause disorientation and hallucinations might, in tiny doses, cure or alleviate the same things. Research into these matters is very undeveloped. It'd be useful to see it through a homeopathic lens. There are questions as to exactly what microdose produces what effects, with or without unwanted side effects. Hahnemann's old problem. It is a reasonable question to ask whether Hahnemannian dilution might preserve therapeutic effects and eliminate crude side effects. But what psychiatric institutions are ever likely to conduct suitable studies? All the same, bizarre psychotropics along with snake venoms and the like are the natural territory of the homeopath. There are many things happening on the outskirts of medicine today where I often wonder, why are homeopaths not engaged with this? They would have something to contribute. Hahnemannian homeopathy was long ago dismissed as a dead end. Instead, it might be considered an unrealised pathway leading out of ancient medical thought with many more interesting aspects than just Hahnemann's very rigid and dogmatic formulation of it as the arch-enemy of the medical establishment. The quandary for homeopathy is that whenever someone tries to step away from or amend Hahnemannian orthodoxy, they very often stray into an even larger swamp of pseudoscience and unproductive experimentalism. Hahnemann, even today, remains a solid rock of logic and reason by comparison. The use of simplexes, simple substances, rather than compounds is a strength in classical homeopathy. But those who seek to advance homeopathy and modernise it, as it were, and adapt it to modern commerce, very often veer into the murky uncertainties and pitfalls of polypharmacy. We should remember that homeopathy as a clinical mode is variegated and has many distinct expressions, often depending upon local regulation. In France, for instance, qualified homeopaths must also be GPs, and are restricted from using Hahnemannian potencies or dilutions greater than 30C, that is 1 part in 100, 30 times. In India, homeopathy has official government endorsement, and we find the habit of using high to the very highest Hahnemannian dilutions as the norm. We are at an historical impasse in every sense these days. Homeopathy, if it is not to be a relic of the past, requires a thorough reconsideration from first principles, from its ancient roots up, and might perhaps be remade in some form, in some hypothetical future. But it certainly lacks the resources, human and otherwise, to undertake a reformation. Very slowly there is new work being done. There are new opportunities for research with new tools. My own view is that it helps to disconnect the homeopathic principle in a wider sense from the specific claims of Hahnemann and his latter-day followers, which need to be assessed and tested as a separate affair. In my own case, I'm more eager to place homeopathy in the wider context of medical philosophy. I find it useful to take an outsider's position. When I encounter the claims of homeopathy's enthusiasts, I'm suitably sceptical. But at the same time, I'm not interested in, and get nothing useful from, homeopathy haters. These thoughts are offered as an alternative to the centuries-long, very tiresome polemic between homeopathy and the medical establishment. In truth, that very Hahnemannian conflict is one of the things that hampers homeopathy by holding it in an untenable historical pattern. Rehearsing arguments from the 18th and 19th centuries is clearly not the way forward, nor the way, as its enemies would see it, of putting it out of its misery once and for all.